This is Anupama from the advisory team at IMMPL, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Thanks for joining us today. The session will be for 1 hour, which starts with 30 minutes of conversation between the two panelists, followed by 25 minutes of Q&A. Please write in the chat box if you're facing any issues in hearing the panelists. And kindly type in your questions in the Q&A box. We will address them one by one in the same order during the Q&A. Welcome to another of our Money, Market and Me series. The topic today being resilience, how to bend, not break. The current pandemic situation has put new and unforeseen pressures on all of us. What is important for us is not to crumble, but to thrive and be resilient over the new normal. To give us an insight on how we can embrace resilience, we have with us today Mr. Vijay in conversation with our CEO, Mr. Lovaii Navlakhi. Vijay has been a cancer thriver since facing colon cancer in 2001. After a successful surgery, he decided against chemotherapy and turned to a holistic and integrated approach. He is now a cancer coaching pioneer and co-author of a book, My Cancer is Me, the Journey from Illness to Wholeness. He has been a leadership coach to CEOs and organizations for the last 15 years. Prior to his second career, he spent over 25 years in branding and communications in Ogilvy and Mather worldwide. Vijay is a sought-after keynote speaker on the subjects of cancer, stress, well-being, and leadership. A heartiest welcome, Vijay, and over to you, Lovaii sir, and to Vijay. Yeah.
Thank you, Anupama. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay, for joining us once again. And I say once again, because I recall that in the 2008 crisis, we had you over to talk to our team at that time on stress.
Yes.
And we still have a few people from our team from that time who I'm sure remember fondly some exercises you made us do to try and get over stress. And as you were preparing for today's event, I was trying to remember all those exercises. But Vijay, let's start straight away by addressing the sort of basic question as to how do you define resilience? Because I think people may be interpreting resilience in different ways. So it might sort of lay the platform for the rest of our conversation.
Yeah. Well, I want to start with a story actually, rather than to define it. You know, this is a story that comes from both Greek mythology as well as from Chinese mythology. And the story goes that there was this big, strong, magnificent oak tree that was near a riverside. And this oak tree used to look down very disdainfully upon this tiny little fragile looking reed, which was also near the riverside. So just imagine this riverside with this big tall oak tree and this tiny little reed. Now what happened when the great storm came was that the oak tree was toppled because of the force of the wind. But the humble reed survived. And so if you ask ourselves the question, what made the humble reed survive? We realize that what the humble reed did was to simply bend with the wind. And when the wind passed and the storm passed, the reed could come back to its original position. Whereas the oak could not do that. The oak was so strong and so proud and so deeply rooted in the ground that when the storm came, the oak tried to fight the storm and was toppled. So really this lesson shows us and tells us that the key to resilience is not just endurance, which is to face the crisis or to take the shock of the crisis. It's actually how do you bounce back from the crisis and then use the crisis to transform yourself. So when you think about resilience, we have to think about all these three dimensions: absorbing the shock, endurance; bouncing back from the shock, recovery; and then growing from the shock, which is transformation. Once you keep these three things in mind, then you have a fuller and a better grasp of resilience.
Wow, that sounds very deep and seems at the same time very challenging when you're going through a crisis yourself. So what have been the learnings from your personal sort of experience where you could do all the three? Because I'm just correlating the current situation
Yes.
that we are in.
Yes.
And, I think just the absorption itself exhausts you.
Yes.
You're not
Yes.
even thinking about bouncing back. You're first saying, let me just absorb and not break. But there's a little bit of bounce in what you mentioned. So how did that play out in your life, and what lessons do you sort of carry from there, which we can sort of take away today?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that question. I'll keep this very brief. When I was diagnosed with cancer, 2001 December, it was a shock, and the rug was pulled from under my feet completely. Now, what happened was that, in a way, at that time, I was like the oak tree, right? I'd never had a serious illness. I never thought I would get a serious illness. I never thought it would be a life-threatening illness. And my first response was to say, I'm going to stand strong and I'm going to fight and I'm going to defeat this. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but I was given some extremely good help from some really top experts. And they taught me to say, look, even if you have to absorb the shock, you have to take it in such a way that its power is a little bit reduced. So, it's like doing judo compared to being in a boxing ring. What you do is that in a boxing ring, you're going to take the punches and you're going to punch back. But what you do in judo is to use the opponent's weight against the opponent. And for that, you have to learn a few things of how to operate with yourself. So this is what happened in my case, that I learned many of these techniques, and I learned how to soften the blow, and I learned how to absorb the blow, and I learned how to bend with it and make some significant changes in my life, which is the act of bending. And then from those changes in my life, the bouncing back and the transformation started. So if I look at my cancer journey, it follows this pattern almost exactly. And I was very lucky to have been given this advice quite early in my journey. So if I were to say, what are my three big lessons from my own journey? One is that, pain is universal. Everybody will feel pain, but suffering is optional, which means how much you suffer is a choice that you can make. And so the first thing I would say is that we're all feeling the pain of the crisis, but how much we choose to let ourselves suffer is in our hands. And once we understand that we have that power, we can hopefully exercise it. The second lesson I want to say is that, I don't like to feel that I overcame my cancer. I like to say that cancer healed me. In other words, cancer made me a better person than I was before my cancer, maybe even a healthier person. So my question to our viewers today is, how is this adversity going to heal you or transform you or grow you? If you can really flip this mindset, maybe there is a lot that you can do in terms of bouncing back. And the last lesson that I learned was that, cancer is a life-threatening illness. So immediately if you have cancer, you think about death. And all your fears and vulnerabilities about death come to the surface immediately. Right. Now, again, there is either we can push it away, either we can deny it, or we can embrace it. And I learned from some of my coaches and mentors that if you can die before you die, you can truly live. Now, what does that mean? It means that, can you let some key parts of your identity go? Can you deconstruct your identity at a personal level, or can you deconstruct your business model at an organization level and then reconstruct it so that you are ready for the future? So actually, this is not just about saying, I'm going to be like the oak tree and absorb the shock. Actually, this is really about changing your orientation so that you will be stronger and healthier and a better individual or a better organization after the crisis compared to before the crisis.
Wow, I mean, it's deep, and I actually want to give a few seconds for to everyone to absorb that. But the question that's coming to my mind is that, this sounds great 20 years from the time it happened.
Mhm.
But during that time, how long did it take for you to realize that, I'm not the oak tree and, I have to do these other things? I mean, was it quick enough that you got the help, or you obviously made some mistakes and then you got the help? How did that happen?
No, I was lucky to get the help very quickly, but it was not an easy journey at all. So make no mistake, it was a very tough, very turbulent, very rocky, very painful journey. I had to take a lot of knocks. The family had to take a lot of knocks in so many ways, but I got the input early. And so once you have the input, then it's again up to you to decide how you want to deal with it, right? And I realized that there were thousands of thrivers around the world. We call them thrivers, people who have done this same journey. But we are not learning lessons from them. We are too caught up in the whole issue of death and dying and mortality and suffering and this and that and the other. And so just like we would learn from best practices in a business setting, I think there is an opportunity to learn from best practices in an individual setting as well. Let me give you a small example, right? I'm pretty sure that our grandparents were far hardier, far tougher, and far more resilient than we are. And I don't think we have learned the lessons at all from them or from our parents, in a way, from the older generation. So the answer to your question is that it's not an easy journey, but a crisis gives you no choice. You either grow or you perish. There is no status quo in a crisis.
So was there a particular trigger that sort of got you that mindset change? Did you just sleep over a bad, have a bad night and next morning was a great morning, or was there some trigger? I'm just trying to.
Actually, the trigger was, as I said, 2 or 3 people who really helped me in that process, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. But through that process of maybe 6 months, a switch flipped in my head.
Okay.
And I don't know how it happened or what was the specific trigger that made it happen, but I can see that it was the inputs from a lot of people and perhaps my own openness to this idea that made that switch flip in my head.
So if I sort of take lessons from that and to today's world and the situation today, we do know that, for some individuals, situations like this become, oh God, it's the end of the world. And for some people, it is great, here's an opportunity for me to clean up things which I always wanted to clean up. So what is it that sort of differentiates one from the other, A, or B? What is the action that would make more people move from, point A to point B?
Yeah, I think you've differentiated it beautifully. There is a mindset element and there is an action element. So let me talk about the mindset element first. When you look at adversity or when you look at crisis, and I'm not talking about cancer now, it could be anything. It could be this kind of a crisis, or it could be a divorce, or it could be being made redundant, or, any other, business going down the toilet, all kinds of things. We see that humanity tends to respond in one of 3 ways. One way is the mindset of a victim. So a victim is somebody to whom life is happening. And they feel attacked, they feel betrayed, they feel ambushed. And I went through that as well. It's quite natural, right? And what victims do is that their power is no longer with them. Their power is given away to somebody else. It could be given away to their employer, it could be given away to their spouse, it could be given away to their doctor, it could be given away to their financial advisor. They don't have the power anymore. So this is one mindset. The second mindset is that of a survivor. This is a fighter's mindset. And this is the mindset which says, hey, I'm not going to take this lying down. I'm going to use all my resources, all my courage, all my character, and I'm going to fight this thing as best as I can. And let's see who will ultimately be left standing. So what the survivor tries to do is basically use their courage, use their character, willpower, and come back to the old normal. This is what survivors' mindsets are like. And we see a lot of them, and we are inspired by a lot of them. The third mindset is that of a thriver. So the thriver does the judo. The thriver embraces the crisis. The thriver says, oh, let me look at this as an opportunity. And let me see what I can do to turn this into a growth platform, a springboard, right? And that requires a very different kind of a mindset. So what do these thrivers actually do? What are the actions that they take, right? So one thing that we have noticed is it's called the 4 C's. So let me explain what these 4 C's are. The first one is control. Thrivers tend to believe that they have a great control over their circumstances, and they act in that way. Whatever they can influence, they will try to influence. Okay, so one is control. The second is that thrivers have what is called commitment, which means they have a higher vision or a higher purpose, which is not just about the current survival, but about a better future. And what they are able to do is they are able to make a commitment towards that better future, the higher vision, outside of just their current situation. So that's the second C, commitment. The third C is challenge. They are able to see this not as a problem, but as a challenge to be addressed. And therefore they reframe, just like I said, cancer can be reframed as a growth opportunity. Adversity can be reframed as an opportunity to really change your business model completely, for example. They are able to reframe and they are able to innovate. And the last C is called cooperation, which is the recognition that if you're in a crisis, it's almost certain that you cannot win against a crisis alone. You may not have all the resources as an individual. So what you have to do is to marshal and gather the resources of many others to work along with you. So are you ready to seek help? Are you ready to look for help? Are you ready to really gather all the resources that you have, both internal and external? So these are the 4 things that thrivers do. And I would invite your viewers to just contemplate that just for a second to say, when it comes to this particular crisis, how much control do you have over what? And are you exercising that control as much as you can? What is your higher vision and purpose beyond this crisis for yourself, for your family, for your organization, for your community? And are you aligning yourself to that higher purpose and to that higher cause? Challenge. Are you reframing this current situation in a way that you see it not as a threat, but as an opportunity? And then are you going to innovate at a very fundamental level to be able to do something about it? And finally, are you willing to seek help? And are you willing to take help from the most unexpected sources? If you are, then you have a better chance of becoming a thriver.
Yeah, so this is what you are saying, that some of the things that we need to do, which is one, the mindset, and then to also sort of take actions in line with the mindset. So one of the things you did mention is about control. And therefore, I'm guessing that people who sort of focus on, okay, what's in my control, I'll fight. What's outside my control, I'll just accept and then see if I can bend around or go around it, is something that becomes an important element to bring to the fore, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that between control and acceptance or submission, there is another space called influence.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I can control, I can do myself, or I can get it done. But then there is a lot of things where I may not have that control, but I do have influence. I can influence other people. I can influence the system. I can influence processes. So I can control what I can influence what I can, and then I accept and bend or navigate around what I can't. So there are all these three levels to look at.
So I'm now thinking from the point of view of for an organization, let's say typically an employee who is way down in the hierarchy. Okay, so he's not thinking many of these things that you are saying. He says, okay, I have to sit and work from home, and suddenly now I'm finding there's no. I mean, we spoke earlier about work-life balance. Forget it. That work is life and life is work, and there doesn't seem to be any respite at all.
Yes.
At the same time, I'm reading and hearing and interpreting things saying, oh, I might lose my job. I have anyway had cutting my salary. Now, how do I motivate myself to do all those things that you are saying, which are needed for me at this time? But I am like, okay, down and out. And, really, I can't influence anything. What are you talking about influencing anything? So.
Yeah. So, see, there are no easy answers to this. This is a tough one, right? But let me give you my attempt at it. And so I'm going to give you my answer at two levels. One is a very practical level. And the second is a slightly more philosophical level, because I think both are important. So at the practical level, let's be clear. A pay cut is better than a job loss. Okay. So yes, there is a whole spectrum of things that can happen. But many organizations, at least the progressive organizations, are thinking in terms of softening the blow as much as possible. So it is quite possible that the first action that an organization might take with you, if you're that employee, is a pay cut rather than a job loss, right? So there is a spectrum here, and we should try and see how you can calibrate that spectrum for yourself first. The second is that this kind of a crisis forces us to identify what is essential, must have, what is nice to have, and what are those indulgences or frills which I really enjoy, but I can do without. Now, when things were normal, we did not segment things into these three buckets. But this kind of a situation where I'm contemplating a pay cut or where I'm contemplating a job loss forces us to be able to do that. So I would highly recommend that as a practical thing, one of the most important things you can do is to do this segmentation, right? And then focus your limited resources, time, money, effort on what is essential. And obviously do without what you can do without, and minimize the nice to haves or do them very occasionally. So this is a practical answer. The third is, and this may sound very callous, but I think it is just frank to say that, look, a crisis is what your savings are for. And many of us who are brought up in a culture where savings are so important to us, and we are very hesitant and reluctant to dip into our savings, right? This is one of those times when we have to say, look, I know I don't like to dip into my savings, but that's what the saving is for. So can I make sure that I dip minimally into my savings and focus them on my essentials? Right? This is, in my view, some very practical things that you can actually do. The last thing I would say is that, look, you were employed before, you will be employed later. The question is, are you more employable in the future or less employable? And so therefore, what can you do? And this is where the whole idea of bending and not breaking comes in. What can you do to upskill yourself so that when this period actually ends, when you apply for your next job or when things go to improve, are you going to be more employable than less employable? So these are the very practical and maybe very brutal things that I would advise somebody to take into account. I used to be the head of HR for a large organization, and I've been through my share of all of this. And this is the advice I used to give people.
Oh, okay. So I'm tempted to ask you a question on personal finances linked to this.
Go ahead.
The sort of thought that comes to my mind is that, obviously when things like this happen, some of the advice that you mentioned is pretty much personal financial planning advice.
Yes.
So, dip into your savings, all of that. But at this times, sometimes because you're feeling so much out of control, you want to vent. And here's the financial advisor who was supposed to be God in inverted commas. So, but it's messed up now. It's all down. So I want to let go my anger and say, to hell, you're supposed to generate that money for me. And we are facing this. And we
Yes.
faced a lot of it in March. It sort of seems to have calmed down a bit for the time being.
Yeah.
So how do we sort of deal with this? I mean, I'm asking you a question more for us than for generally our clients.
Mm. Mm. I mean, the principles are the same, no, Lovaii, that when things are tough and we are down, things hurt more.
Right.
And in a way, all the good work that you or any service provider may have done for many months and many years prior can easily be washed away in one mistake or in one crisis that really affects your clients in a bad way, right?
Mm.
Again, I guess the question that I would pose to your team is to ask yourself and say, if I have truly been a trusted advisor to my clients for many months and many years, right? Then how much goodwill have I accumulated to support my client, and how much of that goodwill will stand me in good stead during a crisis?
Mm.
When this whole question of how much is my responsibility and how much is circumstantial responsibility is a very gray area, right? So when this kind of a crisis happens, or when there is a new technology that suddenly comes up, or a new competitor that suddenly comes up, all the work that you have put in tends to get washed away, and frankly, the only thing that is left with you is your goodwill accumulated over many years.
Mm.
And having been in the advertising business and having been in the coaching business, I know fully well that it's only our bank of goodwill. Or in other words, it's a different form of capital,
Mm.
right? So there is financial capital, but there are also other forms of capital. And therefore, I tend to look at it and say, what are the other forms of capital? There is goodwill, there is physical capital, there is intellectual capital, there is social capital, there is environmental capital. So when we are talking about wealth, are we really taking a big and broad view of all kinds of capital? So if you and your advisors have trained your clients only to think in terms of financial capital, now this is going to come and hurt you.
Mm.
But if you and your advisors have trained your clients and gotten them to see multiple forms of capital, maybe the blow will be a little less harsh to deal with. I don't know if that's a helpful answer, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think it's a viewpoint. And as you said, this is the time to seek cooperation and seek inputs and ideas from different people. So one other thing that you mentioned earlier for the employee is the piece on upskilling.
Yes.
And the thought that comes to my mind is, because we are all at home, everybody's got into this mode of, here is a training program, here's an opportunity to connect. And for a while, I think everybody got sucked into it and all their normal work went out and everyone's saying, okay, let's attend this, let's hear this, do that. Any tips on the right way to upskill oneself at all?
Um, Again, I think this is not something that we should try to do on our own, because we don't even know why we're upskilling, what we should be upskilling for, and how we should be upskilling.
Okay.
And this is where I feel that the HR department of an organization, or your past mentors from your previous career, from your previous jobs, these are all the people that I would advise employees to go and talk to and say, look, if I really want to do something about the future, and I know the future is uncertain right now, but I do know that these have been my skills which have worked for me.
Mm.
And these are my aspirations. This is my higher purpose. Now, in this context, what are the kind of things that I could be doing and I should be doing? And to only bite as much as you can chew, because sometimes there is a risk of taking on so much that your upskilling will become stressful for you. And you certainly don't want that. You want that to be a fulfilling part, not a stressful part.
Mm.
So I would say that it requires a little bit of consultation. It's just like if you were to go and do a master's, let's say if you were to take a sabbatical and go do a master's, you would not just do it impulsively. You would actually put in some time and effort to figure out what's the right thing to do.
So, Vijay, I want to just ask one question because I already see questions popping up on the Q&A box, and I want to
Yes.
keep time for that, and also time for you to elaborate some of the answers. But are there any mantras that you suggest to the audience to become more resilient, other than all the 4 C's and the various things that you've spoken about already?
I would say that bend and not break is my main mantra, and I've tried to give you some dimensions of what bend and not break means. But I would invite all the viewers to individually reflect on that and say, in my life, given my personality, what does bend and not break mean? And where are the opportunities for me to actually apply that principle? So that would be my mantra number 1. My mantra number 2 would be to say that adversity is tough. There's no question about it. But are you willing to take that big step of seeing adversity as a call to adventure? That you are going into unknown territory, but you're going in with a sense of enthusiasm and anticipation rather than with a sense of fear and with a sense of anxiety. And so are you willing to take that call to adventure? And the last mantra I want to give is, since I started with a story, let me also end with a story. So this is a story of a very famous, very learned Buddhist scholar who was a professor in an American university. And he had the chance to go to Japan and interact with a Buddhist monk, a famous Buddhist monk. So he went to that monk's ashram, and they were having tea. And so this guy was talking about, how much he is curious, how much he knows. He has all these questions, and he wants to have this debate and this discussion. And the monk was pouring tea, and he kept pouring and he kept pouring and he kept pouring until the cup overflowed. And the tea fell over and fell into this professor's lap. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you pouring so much tea?" And so the monk said to him that if you're not willing to empty your cup, how will you create the space for anything new? And so for me, that's a very powerful story. And what this lockdown is doing for me is to give me the chance to see which part of the cup, my cup, do I need to empty in order to create space for the new beginning. So what are you willing to let go? What are you willing to let die in order for a new kind of beginning? This would be my third mantra.
Wow. Very interesting, and thanks very much, Vijay, for those insights. You had a poll or something that people needed to download, right? Do you want to ask them to do it now?
Sure, we can. If it'll be a nice little thing. So I'm going to just ask Dharan to put up the link again in the chat box.
Yes, put it up.
Yeah, so my request to all the participants is if you can please copy and paste that poll into your browser, and then I will explain what you have to do. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the poll. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to just take a 10-second quiet time, reflect, and answer this question. What has been your dominant emotion during the COVID crisis? What has been the dominant emotion during the COVID crisis? What I would like you to do is, I would like you to type in one word and then hit submit, and then type in one more word and then hit submit, and then type in a third word and hit submit. So you have 3 answers you can give to the same question. What has been your dominant emotion during the COVID crisis? Let me give you a few seconds to do that. 3 options.
Vijay, do you need to activate?
It's already activated.
Okay.
I can see the responses coming up.
Okay.
So the panelists can also do it if you want. So if we have, I don't know, 30 or 40 people on the call, we should get at least close to 100 responses. And as we are typing in, when people repeat their emotions, they will show up in this word cloud. So you can also see on your screen what is coming up and what picture is forming. Keep going. And so we can see here that fear, uncertainty, challenging, family, there's also some elements of opportunity, relaxed, excited, challenge, empathy, spirituality. And you can see what's on the periphery: focus, anger, rediscovery, gratitude, mood, creativity. Beautiful, beautiful. So let me give another 10 seconds and then I'm going to lock the screen. And then I'm going to give you the chance to do the same thing with one more question. And let's see how that goes. So for now, I'm going to lock this screen. Bear with me, please. So I'm going to lock this screen. And now I'm going to go take you to the next screen where you've talked about the dominant emotion. Now I want you to put down, what do you see as the upsides or the silver linings to the COVID crisis? What do you see are the silver linings to the COVID crisis? You have to do exactly the same thing. So you can type 3 responses each, 1 word only. Fascinating to see what's coming up here. Family, patience, flexibility, health, priorities, bonding, togetherness, time, peace, wishful, climate, frugality, resilience, liberated, control, mindfulness. Another 10 seconds. Look for the upsides, the silver linings. Okay, so I'm going to lock this screen now. Thank you very much for participating in this, and I'll make a comment as soon as I stop sharing my screen. Thank you for that. So I hope you enjoyed that and saw the picture actually form about what's going on in everyone's minds at this moment in terms of the dominant emotions as well as the upsides. Now, here is the thing. The insight is that we human beings have both sides to us. We have the side that is fearful and anxious and worried and facing challenges, but we also have the side which is able to see the silver linings and the upsides. So the simplest thing that we can actually do is to learn how to co-hold both of these and to access that part of us that can see the upsides, that can see the optimistic side of it. It doesn't mean that you let go the fear fully. It'll never go away because you're dealing with a tough reality. But at least you have something to balance it out. So with that, I'll bring my spoken part to a close, and I'm happy to take the questions. Would you like me to just look at the questions and take them one by one, Anupama? Or do you want to cluster them? How do you want to handle it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Vijay. I think I'll just read out the questions
Yes.
for the benefit of everyone.
Yes.
And also for the attendees, yeah, we could please write in your questions in the Q&A box. And we'll also be conducting another poll for your feedback at the end of the Q&A.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll start with the questions.
Yes.
Pain is universal, suffering is optional. It really stuck the chord. We keep questioning why me? It
Yes.
isn't fair. Why always this happens to me? How to let go of all these shots?
Yeah, what a fantastic question. It's hard to give a short answer to this question, but let me try. There are two words in the question, why me? Which do you think is the more important word? In my opinion, the more important word is me. And the only way I can answer this question is to say that we have a strong sense of me and we have a strong wish for the kind of me that I want to be. And anything that comes in the way of that feels like it is an attack on me, my identity, my sense of self, my sense of self-worth, of self-esteem, all my plans and dreams, and so on and so on and so on. So actually the answer to this question is to not be so attached to this me. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's a really tough thing to do. I can tell you that every person who I work with who has cancer, we have to help them to think through this because life seems really, really, really unfair. But if you can basically shift your focus away even a little bit from that me, I, me, myself, then you may find that this is an easier one to deal with. If you want to know more about this, you are welcome to email me and I can send you some more resources on it. But that's the best advice I can give you in the short time that we have.
Thanks, Vijay. Next question. What is your advice to a cancer survivor whose family wants him to rest and the organization which wants him?
This is a very specific question about cancer, and I'm not very sure if this is the right forum for it. But let me just say that in these kinds of dilemmas, what you need is a dialogue. And the question of priorities, how important is rest and how important is going back to normalcy in terms of work, is a dilemma that both the individual and the organization need to process. And the only way to process it is through dialogue. So I cannot give a specific answer apart from saying that really both sides need to come to the table and have a dialogue which is open and frank and transparent. And hopefully then an answer will come. I was very fortunate that my company gave me a lot of freedom to decide how I should respond. But not everybody, every company may be able to do that, and not every individual may have the opportunity to do that. So I think dialogue is the only way.
Thanks, Vijay. You very rightly said that savings are tough to dip into, given Indian mindset. How does one prepare himself to dip into their savings?
This is a question I think Lovaii should answer. Lovaii, do you want to take a shot at it?
So I think that, you know, as a financial advisor, we do tell people that you must have money for emergencies. And I know this is something that you wouldn't have envisaged, because typically for people who are working, the emergency is to do with how quickly can I get a job if I lost one. And um, thinking about it in February, you would have got a very different answer from what you will get today. So obviously that quantum of money that you need to sort of pull out is higher. And even though some part of it may have to be pulled out from some assets which have fallen in value, I think the more important thing is you have pull that money out for the emergency first. There will be opportunities to make up what you have lost, is the way I see it.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Lovaii.
Thank you, sir. What if chemo is not a choice or a pay cut is not a choice? Not if your guidance is post chemo. Is that a right assumption? Although you avoided chemo, which is magical.
Well, yes, I avoided chemo, but I want to make it very clear that it was not a choice that I made out of any kind of courage or bravery or anything like that. My doctors gave me the choice. So I did have a choice. And so your question is very right. What happens if there is no choice? And if there is no choice, then you have to follow the directions of whoever has the greatest expertise at that moment. So in the case of health, you have to follow your doctor's advice and guidance and counsel. If it's, let's say you're dealing with a legal matter, then you have to follow the advice of the lawyer that you have engaged or an architect that you have engaged. And so for me, actually, it's not so much to overrule the expert, but really to take the counsel of the expert and make sure that whatever decision you're making with your eyes fully open. And so therefore, I would always advise for those kind of critical issues where you don't feel you have a choice, you should get a range of views from different people before you actually make the decision that you need to make. And this is true whether it's about moving home or whether it's about illness or whether it's about how you're going to use your money. That's at least my way of doing it.
Thanks, Vijay. Would you advise people in general to struggle and strive for improvement, not looking at short-term results? Can one look at one's struggle to improve oneself even in the absence of results?
What a nice question from Shabir. I think, Shabir, the answer to your question is in your question, that the word struggle means that there will be times when there are no results. If you always had results, then it would not be a struggle. And I feel as if, it's just like the butterfly who has to break through the cocoon. There is a lot of struggle involved. There is a lot of transformation involved. And it can be very painful. But without that struggle, either you will not get the results, and you will certainly not get the fulfillment from those results. So I tend to see struggle as a necessary component of getting the results and the kind of fulfillment that you want.
Thanks, Vijay. The next question is from HR Desk. HR has been practicing employee engagement for a decade, but I always debate with myself how tangible it is, how to measure the impact of it.
Okay, so this is a slightly technical question, but let me take a shot at answering it. See, employment engagement itself is a metric. Okay. What is employee engagement a metric of? Employee engagement is a metric of the health of the culture of that organization. So in a strong culture, there is high engagement. In a relatively weak culture, there is low engagement. So the way I see it is that employee engagement is a metric of culture. Now, for employee engagement, you can also have certain other kinds of metrics. For example, attrition, for example, loyalty, for example, different kinds of things, motivation levels, and so on and so on and so on. So the way I look at it, to answer your question, it's really about, one, recognizing that what HR is really trying to do is to build a healthy and productive and a supportive and an empowering culture in every organization. employee engagement is a very important criterion or a metric of that. And then there are specific metrics, as I said, that you can try and measure. Now, in my experience, there is no question but that employee engagement is a critical factor for the health of any organization. And therefore, it is worthy of the time. If you and your company have been doing it for decades, then I take my hat off to you, because it's a wonderful thing that you are doing.
Thank you, Vijay. This question, okay. Hi, Vijay, this is Rangesh. This is an unknown enemy and a tricky situation we are fighting. People are scared and anxious. Given this scenario, should brands strike a balance between pushing direct sales messages and displaying empathy to the consumers? I'm seeing so many brands that are downright not bothered and are making people spend. I've been in advertising for 18 years and not able to digest this blitzkrieg.
What a great question, Rangesh. Thank you. How do I answer it? Look, when there is a crisis and a certain kind of our normalcy has been disturbed, and we are in a very strange situation right now. So I think what we are seeing now is simply people lashing out blindly without knowing what they are doing or why they are doing it. So if I was still in the advertising business and if anybody still took my advice, I would be saying to my clients, don't do anything for 6 months. That's what I'd be saying to them. Because right now you are throwing money into a situation where you have no idea how it is being received, how it is landing, how it is going to be responded to. You have absolutely no idea at all. So I would be advising my clients to basically just do some maintenance communication. Just remain visible, remain slightly above the radar, make sure that your loyal consumers remember who you are, and don't try to do anything new. Don't try to do anything crazy right now because it's too uncertain, it's too volatile. So this would be my answer. And the blitzkrieg, I think, is an outcome of confusion rather than out of clarity.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Next question is how to move away from anxiety to curiosity around any uncertainty. Wow. Okay.
So so this is the beauty of the two word clouds that you did, right? So we can always see that there will be an anxious part of us, and then there will be a more optimistic, hopeful, and perhaps curious part of us. So the answer to your question, Benjamin, is not to move away from anxiety to curiosity, but to pay more attention, more mindfully and more consciously towards that side of you, which is curious and hopeful and optimistic. And this requires being what I call learning how to become present, how to not be caught up in the situation, but to actually have a kind of a quiet and an expanded awareness of the situation with all its dimensions. This is something that everybody can actually learn. The technique of becoming present. And if you're present, you can then shift and say, okay, let me pay attention to the anxiety from my state of presence. Let me pay attention to my state of curiosity from that state of presence. But if you're not present, you'll never be able to toggle back and forth between all these different parts of you.
Fantastic. Okay. Bending or adapting to situations known or foreseen is possible. But how to adapt to this unforeseen and unknown situation?
It's like asking the question, how does a tennis player prepare to play with Roger Federer? The answer is that we keep the basics healthy, right? You don't know what's going to come. You have no idea. All you can do is to make sure that the basics are in place. So that means, is your physical health in good shape? Is your mental health in good shape? Is your emotional health in good shape? Is your social or relational health in good shape? Is your spiritual health in good shape? If you are in general good shape, which means that you have a preventative mentality or a preventative mindset, then your preparedness for meeting the unknown is obviously going to be greater. If you're not in a good baseline situation in terms of the basics being in place, then obviously the uncertainty is going to hit you that much harder. So what we would recommend is always to make sure that the minimum is kept in good, healthy condition. That's the best we can do.
Thank you, Vijay. The next one is, COVID is a huge issue. As humans, we are not likely to be able to make large changes to ourselves and our lifestyles in this short time. What would you suggest be the areas on which people can look to start working on, one stage at a time, sequentially? Any mantra on that?
This may be a bit controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. One of my great heroes is a guy called Joseph Campbell, who was the world's greatest mythologist. And he's the one who talked about, the call to adventure, adversity as a call to adventure. And so one of the things that Joseph Campbell says is, where you stumble, that is where the treasure is. So the answer to Archana's question is to say that start with whatever is giving you the greatest discomfort, not the area which is giving you the greatest comfort. It's the area that gives you the greatest discomfort where your likely treasure is. So if you had to pick an area, go for the one that is giving you the most discomfort. It could be something in your physical life. It could be something in your mental life. It could be something in your emotional life. It could be something in your relational life, or it could be something in your spiritual life at an individual level. So similarly, if you're in an organization, try and look at where you've been facing the biggest challenge and take that on, because that is where your breakthrough is most likely to be. This is from Joseph Campbell. Where you stumble, there is the treasure.
Thank you, Vijay. Next question is, how do we know that suffering is enough and it's time to move, let go of, and not get stuck?
If you are present and if you are attentive to what is going on for you inside of yourself, then I think you will naturally know when suffering is arising, when suffering has a grip on you, and when suffering is slowly leaving you. So I don't think that it is actually such a conscious or such a binary choice. I think it comes from being aware, it comes from being sensitive to yourself, and it comes from seeing that just like the good times don't last, the bad times don't either. This is the beautiful cycle of life and of nature and of human experience, that right now we are suffering, but even within the suffering, there is some amount of fulfillment and joy. Or there could be wonderful times, but there could also be suffering happening in some other dimensions of our life. Or in the morning, we could be suffering, and in the evening, we could be joyful. Right? So these polarities are constantly going to be there, and all you can do is to be aware, to be present, and to be sensitive.
Yeah, thank you. We have two last questions, please.
Sure.
And I would appreciate if that's the last one because of the time that we are running out of. Okay, so the next question is, at a macro level, do you think consumers are turning more experimentative with new products or services at this time? Or in your opinion, would they find comfort in their tried and tested brands?
Uday, I think it's going to be a combination of the two. Let me explain what I mean. I think what people are going to do is they're going to want to consume their tried and trusted brands. But I think what they will do is they will experiment with different channels and different models within those brands. So in other words, I will probably stay with my brand of tea or my brand of soap, but I'll be more open to buying it online, just to give you a very simple example. So I think it will be a combination of the two. They will stay with what they are familiar with, but they might find new channels and new ways of doing it.
Thank you, Vijay. This is the last question.
Yeah.
When I compare people who are financially stable to people who are not financially well-to-do, they're able to absorb or grow through the crisis to some extent as they're able to arrange the resources required to fight the same. But any advice for people who are financially unstable as they develop severe stress, trauma due to their inability to access the essential resources needed to reduce the impact of the crisis.
Yes, I mean this is the big question for us all, isn't it? In a poor country like India, when you look at the socio-economic pyramid, let's be honest, the people who are on this call are at the very tip of the socio-economic pyramid. We have the luxury to be on this call. We have the luxury to be in our homes. We have the luxury to be connected. We have the luxury to be able to have this conversation. Whereas people at the bottom end of the pyramid are suffering terribly right now. So actually, I don't have any advice for the financially unstable. I believe that those of us who are financially stable have a duty and an obligation to help those who are not. I feel as if right now, the responsibility is with us, the obligation is with us to be able to do more than we are doing. Obviously, the government and the organizations, the NGOs need to do a lot, but so do we. And so I don't have any advice for the financially unstable. I have advice for the financially stable, which is to say, can you please share a little bit of your surplus?
Yeah, thank you so much, Vijay. Sir, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I certainly want to thank Vijay for sharing his surplus of knowledge that he's had on this topic. And I think we got questions on cancer, marketing, HR. So it went well beyond resilience, I think, in many ways. So it is really good to get insights on that. And this, makes us continuously think of newer ways of dealing with the individuals, because we are all facing, unusual and unprecedented times. So thank you so much for the insights. Really valuable for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Lovaii. Thank you to Anupama and to Sridharan and to Shweta and your team for pulling all of this together. And I hope the audience had a good time, and I'd love to get some feedback of what you guys thought about this session. So I know you were going to run a poll, so I'd be looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, Vijay. I think all of us, each one of us here today has a takeaway from this session. I can assure you that. We're really grateful for the time and effort you took out to share your thoughts and experiences here.
My pleasure entirely.
Okay. For the attendees, we'll be opening the poll for your feedback, please. Thank you everyone for making it today. Hope this was, and I'm pretty sure that this was useful. We'll continue to cover various other topics in our IMM Connect Money, Market and Me series that we feel is relevant to you. Next week, the topic of our discussion would be the changing face of insurance. Please share any other topic that you would like our insights on for our future connects in the chat box. We will make the effort to organize the same for sure. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you once again and have a great weekend. Please finish the poll before you leave. Thank you. And thank you, Vijay, once again.
Most welcome.
Thanks, Vijay.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Vijay. It was really, really insightful.
Thank you so much. And please share the recording with me when it's available.
Done for sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
All
Thank you so
right.
much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.